Welcome to Module 11, Putting It All Together, Sharing and Collaborating. The learning objectives are, first, to identify the key characteristics of effective, well-told statistical story. Second, evaluate best practices for sharing and collaborating on data visualization. Third, design dashboards and stories using Tableau Desktop. And lastly, publish visualizations to Tableau Public for collaboration and feedback.
So the first thing I want to mention is a gentleman named Hans Rosling, and you may have heard of him before. He was a Swedish physician and public health statistician. He was really made famous by his 2006 TED Talk, in which he talked about the fertility rate as it changes in the world and its effect on life expectancy. He really, in that TED Talk, dispelled a lot of the myths about the developing world. He also founded an organization called Gapminder.org, which is basically an organization that teaches young people about data and statistics and visualization. I would highly, highly recommend that you visit Gapminder.org, see what it's all about, and also take a look at his TED Talk. It's about 20 minutes long. It's very, very enjoyable. And lots of people consider him like their mentor, or who they want to be as a visualization expert, because when you watch his video, you can see the passion that he has about what he's talking about and how he channels that passion into his visualizations. So what makes his presentation so good is the fact that he not only does he focus on good data, doesn't focus on perception, but he has that passionate storytelling ability. And that's what you really need to have in order to be a very successful visualization expert. You have to be passionate about what you're talking about. So before you start to tell your story, you actually have to do a few things ahead of time. You have to know about, first thing you have to know about is your audience. Is your audience executives? Are they regional managers? Are they doctors, salespeople, general public? It's very important that you know who you're talking to, because you're going to format and organize your message based on who your audience is. The message that you convey to the general public would be very, very different from the message that you convey to an executive of a big company. Also, in regards to the audience, you need to know if they're interested in exploring the data more, or do they just want it explained to them? Because that will affect your visualizations, and if you're going to do any interactivity, are they going to filter the data? Do you want them to be able to drill down deeper into the data? That affects how you present your data as well. You also need to know the main question or the message. So are there KPIs, key performance indicators, or metrics that are already set in place that you need to show data on? Or is there an event that happened in the corporation that is instigating the evaluation of the data? And also, are there preconceived ideas and assumptions? And this is something that you have to be very, very aware of when you're doing data analytics and visualizations, because sometimes we think we already know the answer to the question. And that can be dangerous, because if we think we know the answer, our approach is going to be affected. So it's very important that you be not swayed by what you think the answer is going to be. There's something that's called the gambler's fallacy, and you may have heard of it before, but it's basically when you flip a coin 5 times in a row, and each time you get a heads. The tendency is that people think that the odds of the next flip becoming tails is going to be much higher because you've already gotten heads for 5 times in a row. But actually your odds of getting tails is exactly the same as the previous flips, 50%. But you have that instinct already in you thinking, well, okay, I've already gotten it 5 times. I'm not going to get it for a 6th time. There's just no possible way. The odds have to be different. And they're not. And that's what you have to keep in mind. Do not let what your perception is affect how you approach the question and how you answer the question. The other thing you need to know is your audience depth level. Are they more interested in aggregations, trends, and patterns, which would lead you to do more graphs and charts, or are they more interested in granular level data? Do they want to see details and actual numbers? That would mean that you'd probably do more tables in your dashboards. You may have people that want a blend of both, and that's perfectly fine. You also need to know your preferred mode of communication. Does your audience like words and numbers? Do they like pictures and graphs, or do they want a blend of both? So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about your goals as a storyteller. The first thing you need to have as a goal is to communicate well. As Edward Tufte would say, beyond all else, show the data. So keep your message simple. Don't add things to it unless you absolutely have to. Try to tell your story without distractions. That can be additional data that you're throwing in that you don't really need to tell your story, or it could be that non-data ink that you might be tempted to throw in. Icons and just unnecessary graphical elements. Try to keep everything as simple as possible, including your visual display. This is really important. Understand the message first yourself before trying to explain it to others. This gets a lot of people into trouble. If they're approaching a question and they're answering it and they don't understand it well enough themselves, there's no way they're going to be able to convey the message to others. So make sure that you truly understand the message that you're trying to tell and the data behind it. And also provide your numbers in a way that your audience will understand. And don't use a display that your audience doesn't understand. We talked a little bit about like box and whisker charts. A lot of people don't understand those. If you have an audience that doesn't get it, don't use it. Use simple graphical elements that they will understand. That's why bar charts, line graphs, those are very popular and used a lot because people understand them. I shouldn't have to say this, but another one of your goals, and it's very important, is to stick to what is true. Never, ever misrepresent your data. Remember, we talked about how the media and social media can manipulate the audience by changing the display of the data. For example, when you have a bar chart, if they take away the 0 point, that affects the length of the bar chart and makes the differences between categorical items seem greater. That's misrepresentation. You never want to do that. Also, never make assumptions about what the data has to say. You may think that it says something, but it actually doesn't. It's because you're adding your feelings and your emotions to it. Stick to what is true. And finally, reference your sources. If you're taking data from a particular source, whether it's in your corporation or if you're getting public data, always make sure that you reference that. Because not only that will give your audience the ability to go to that source to find out more information, but it also validates what you're trying to say and makes what you're saying seem more reliable and truthful. Another goal is to always provide context. And context can be supplemental information, things like the culture of the organization, status of the industry, project progress. This is stuff that if you're going to include it, you're probably not going to include it in your visualization itself. You're going to include it in some sort of supplemental or supporting text, like tooltips, captions, annotations, maybe even an executive summary. You may also include comparisons as a part of your context. You might be showing something that's currently going on. You may want to compare it to the past, or you may want to compare it to the future. You may want to compare it to targets and goals of your organization. You may also want to compare across regions, departments, or other companies. And you also may want to include averages. So context is always really important to include. And then you want to also have a logical sequence of your story. And that can vary again based on your audience. So does it make more sense to your audience to tell your story chronologically? Or is it makes more sense to start with a simple concept and then break it down further into more complex concepts? Or do you want to start with a big picture element, something that shows the overall picture, and then you break it down into details? Just keep your audience in mind and what makes most sense to them. And then finally, you want to encourage action. After all, this is what your visualization should be all about. This should be your ultimate goal. Because if you create a visualization, your audience looks at it and does nothing with it, you really haven't, your work's really been for naught. You really always want to make sure that your audience takes the visualization that they have, that you made for them, they get the message, they understand what's going on, and then they take action based on it. So make sure that you provide information that elicits a response from the audience. Remember, I think I've told you before how Edward Tufte says that if your statistics are boring, then you've got the wrong numbers. So you should have numbers that are going to elicit some sort of response. Try to make your message memorable and make suggestions for future actions if that's what your audience wants. A lot of people, when they look at the visualizations I make, they don't know what to do with it. And so I might make suggestions based on that. But you may have an audience that understands what you're trying to get across and they know what to do. So you don't have to make any suggestions like that. So let's talk about a few dashboard design principles. Now, a dashboard is basically an organized group of visualizations that they're all related and you're using them all to tell one particular message. When you were working on your midterm project, you could have done a dashboard, but you weren't at that point in your knowledge, so I didn't have you do that. But you could have taken all your visualizations that you made and put them on a dashboard because you were trying to make every one of your visualizations try to tell a story or try to make a point or try to all go towards your final message. So you could have taken all your visualizations and put them in one dashboard. That is what essentially a dashboard is. And the 5-second rule, I can't remember who promotes the 5-second rule. It could be Stephen Few, but basically, can your user understand the most important points in your dashboard within 5 seconds? Now, this isn't going to be when they first see it, because when a user first sees a dashboard, they need to take a little bit more than 5 seconds to understand it. But after that, if it's something that they look at every day to see how the sales for the day went, or if they look at it every week or every month, at some point they should be able to just look at it and within a few seconds know what they need to do based on what they see in front of them. So this is an example of a dashboard that would never ever meet that 5-second rule. It's too much going on. So this is what you want to try to stay away from. And it's very easy to end up in a situation like this. You may design a perfect dashboard with a certain number of elements, and then your user might come back in and say, oh, hey, I want this too, or I want this too, or I want this. It's project creep. And that happens a lot with web design, with other IT projects. The user down the road will say, well, I want something else. So that will happen. And don't be discouraged if that happens. Basically, you got to do what your user wants. But you should strive towards not doing something like this, at least from the very get-go. Okay, always have a logical layout. We've talked before about the F outline in your dashboard design. That's also in web design. The human eye tends to look at pages on a screen from left to right and then from top to bottom. And so if they do an eye tracking of a screen, basically it shows that the eye looks at a screen more frequently across the top and along the left-hand side. So that's where you want to put your most important items. Those are the high real estate areas. Now this is called the inverted pyramid. And this is an approach that you can use with your dashboard design, where you have your most important stuff at the very top. And then you gradually include things that are less significant below it. This is a really good example of that. So in this dashboard, there's 3 different elements. You have your big one, your map, way across the top. That's the most important one. Then you have a heat map on the lower left, and then you have a table on the lower right. So this is a nice design, how these are all set up in a way where most important's on the top, then to the left, then to the bottom right. Also remember that less is more. Keep your visualizations down to 7 plus or minus 2 per dashboard. I actually think 9 would be way too many, but it all depends on the type of visualization. The 7 plus or minus 2, we may have talked about this before, but it's a magical number, also called Miller's Law. And this was a principle developed in 1956 by psychologist George Miller. And this is basically where the number of objects that a human brain can hold in short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2. Web design uses this number quite a bit. And in dashboarding, you can do the same thing. But like I said, I kind of think that 9 might be too many in some instances. And it really depends on your audience as well. So here's a dashboard. Whoop. Okay. This is going to go back and forth. It's going to go from something that's too crowded and then not so crowded. So the first one that was shown was too crowded, and that was only 4 elements. But you also notice that there were scroll bars. There were vertical and horizontal scroll bars. So there was too much going on that the user would have to move and look around. So in that instance, 4 was too many. If you have scroll bars, you should try to avoid them as much as possible. You might need a vertical scroll bar if you have a table that has lots of detailed numbers and the user just has to scroll through them. Of course, with printing, you can't do that. So you have to stay away from scroll bars in dashboards that you have to print out. But never, ever, ever should you have a vertical scroll bar where you're forcing your user to view all your data using a scroll bar going from left to right. Never, ever do that. You shouldn't force your user to do that. So the way to get around that is to chunk your data, filter your data automatically, or combine it in other ways to simplify your message. So this is something that you want to strive for more than the first element, or the first dashboard that I showed. Okay, and then finally, you have to choose the right visualizations. And this is going back to our first talks when we first started looking at tables and graphs. What is the right visualization for the message that we're trying to convey? Do you use a table? You're going to use a table again if your user wants to see details, if they want to look up values, if they want to compare specific values. Those are when tables are most appropriate. If they want to look at trends, if they want to look at patterns, that's when graphs are more appropriate. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind the type of data that you have. Do you have a lot of quantitative data, a lot of different measures? Do you have a lot of different categorical items, a lot of different dimensions that you can slice and dice your quantitative data on? And you have multiple sets of quantitative data that you can blend together. Also, in choosing the right visualization, keep in mind your relationship of the data. Is it ranking? Is it parts to a whole? Is it a deviation, or is it a distribution? Remember, your relationship is going to affect the type of visualization that you use, the method, a bar chart, a line chart, a heat map, box and whiskers, what you choose as your method of visualization should be based on the relationship of your data beyond anything else. Okay, that is it for the lecture this week. The next thing is the practice exercise. And what we are going to do, I'm going to give you guys a packaged Tableau workbook that has the data already in it. It's actually going to be Global Superstore data, so it's not going to be surprising to you. But it's already going to have a few separate worksheets with different visualizations. And then together we're going to put these all on a dashboard. So that's what you're going to do for the practice. And then for the graded exercise, it's going to be the same thing. I'm going to give you a packaged workbook, and it's going to be the National Park Service data that you've worked with already, but it's going to have the visualization that you're going to use to put in your dashboard. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because I want everybody to start at the same point. If I have you guys use your workbooks that you created when you were working with the National Park Service data, everybody's going to be starting from different points, and I don't want to do that. I want everybody to start at the same point and then build from there. So that is it for this module. Good luck with the practice and the graded assignment, and as always, if you have problems, let me know. Thanks.